Good afternoon. I want to extend my welcome to all of you who are here this afternoon and those who follow through the stream. This afternoon, we have another lineup of great presentations. The first one will be done by Dr. Mark Wilson. You have heard him yesterday, so I will briefly repeat his bio. Dr. Mark Wilson is the founder and director of the Asia Minor Research Center in Antalya, Turkey, where he and his wife Dindy have lived since 2004. Mark received a doctorate in New Testament at the University of South Africa, where he is also a research fellow. His research interests include ancient Jewish communities, Roman roads, and biblical routes in the Eastern Mediterranean. Mark is the author and editor of numerous books, articles, including A Biblical Turkey, A Guide to the Jewish and Christian Sites of Asia Minor, St. Paul the Traveler and Roman Citizen. He regularly leads study trips to Turkey, Greece, Malta, and Italy. He also blogs periodically for Bible History Daily. His presentation this afternoon is The Archaeology of the Seven Churches in the Apocalypse. Now, his presentation will have a response by Dr. Kendra Haloviak-Valentine, one of our own here at La Sierra. Dr. Kendra Haloviak-Valentine is Professor of New Testament Studies in the HMS Richards Divinity School here at La Sierra University. She earned bachelor's degree in theology and English from Columbia Union College and a master's in New Testament from Andrews University Theological Seminary. Kendra completed her doctorate in New Testament and Ethics at the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley in 2002. Kendra has served as a pastor in Ohio, Michigan, and Maryland, and taught at Adventist colleges and universities in the United States and Australia. Through her experience as a pastor and teacher, her interest in the Book of Revelation grew. She has presented over 40 seminars on the Book of Revelation for clergy and lay audiences. Kendra has published numerous articles in journals and magazines. She has contributed to various book projects. In 2015, she published Worlds at War, Nations in Song, Dialogic Imagination, and Moral Vision in the Hymns of the Book of Revelation. Kendra has been teaching at La Sierra University since 2002. If you have not taken one of her classes, you have missed out on a lifetime experience. Kendra is married to Gilbert Valentine, who is a leading specialist in Adventist history. My archaeological experience in regard to Turkey got first-hand experience in 1989 when I first visited Turkey, driving from southern Germany to Jordan in my Volkswagen. And it was quite an experience. And I'm glad to see some of the things. I recognize a couple of these things that were there even then. So without any further ado, Mark, please, it is yours.
Thank you to both April and Friedberg for your introductions to those live and those virtually with us. I want to jump right to our topic here. The students in church groups that come to Turkey largely follow two different itineraries, our most popular ones. Of course, Journeys of Paul would be one of them, starting in Antioch on the Orontes in the southeast, traveling all the way to Alexandria, Troas in the northwest, a journey of about 1,000 miles. So you quickly begin to realize the dimensions of Paul's journeys, even within one part of the Eastern Mediterranean. A second itinerary that is very popular, of course, is the seven churches. And many groups come to Turkey to do that. Why? Through teaching the New Testament for many decades, I've learned in asking questions of my audience, which is the most difficult book in the New Testament? And everybody will uniformly say the book of Revelation. So people come to Turkey to visit the seven churches to gain further insight into this concluding book, not only to the New Testament, to the biblical canon. So I want to take you on a little bit of a journey today through the world that I see on a regular basis here in the seven churches. Just as a side note, two different video projects on the seven churches that I've been involved in, both are released coincidentally this fall. So maybe you've seen these advertised. You can download one of them online as well from a site called Appian Media. But if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer that after our session. So can anyone identify where this photograph is taken? What it is? Ellie, you can't answer, he knows. So this is the theater in Ephesus as it looked before excavation started. So we've come a long way from then. I wrote an interesting piece on Mark Twain, who visited Ephesus in his famous Innocents Abroad visit in the mid 1800s. And this is one of the sites that he did see. So let's get started. What is material culture? So April referred to that term. So it's the physical world of the first audience of the New Testament. So this is my world here, a little bit much later than your work in Jordan. So we're looking at Greek, Roman, Jewish, indigenous, Lycaonian, for example, in Acts chapter 14. Architecture, we talked a bit yesterday about temples, stadiums, theaters, aqueducts, all these incredible architectural remains that we have throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Plastic art, statues, pottery, mosaics, frescoes. Inscriptions, the field of epigraphy. We had this wonderful discussion yesterday on coins, numismatics, and an area I'm particularly interested in, bridges and roads, an area we called hodagology, from hodos, the Greek word for roads. So in my neighborhood in Antalya, we have the remains of the Via Sebaste. They're well-preserved Roman road dating from 6 BC. So this whole area of archaeoexegesis, sorry for the typo here, is possible for many New Testament texts. And so providing a useful supplement to text-based exegesis. So many of my colleagues in New Testament are basically text-based. They don't get beyond that, they don't get in the field, and they don't integrate material culture with their study of the text. And this is, we're gonna walk through some of that here today. So purpose of biblical archaeology. So in one of his textbooks, Jonathan Reed mentions it's imperative for the study of the New Testament. So many people use archaeology, of course, for apologetic purposes. But Reed says, and I agree, archaeology may not be able to prove or disprove, for that matter, the accuracy of the New Testament, but it teaches us much about the lives and beliefs of those earliest Christians. And so I see it as corroborative. So the 2D, two-dimensional texts that we read, whether in English translation or in original Greek, coming to the field, seeing these places suddenly they kind of become 3D. I can't tell you how many people at the end of a tour will just say, I'll never read the New Testament the same again. And so this is what happens when you see now these texts in 3 dimensions. And finally, Greek epigrapher Angelos Keniotes makes this comment. Progress in the understanding of early Christianity is exclusively based on papyri and inscriptions. I wouldn't say quite exclusively, but it's very important as new inscriptions are discovered as we move along. So we saw this map yesterday of the Roman province of Asia, founded in 129 BC. And we see the boundaries here. And this is where our 7 churches are located. So we have the 3 on the west coast, Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum. Pergamum slightly inland, but connected through its port of Alia. And we have 4 inland, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And so that we see very quickly from this map that we know that at least 20 cities in the province of Asia had churches in the first century. So when you think about 7 churches, 7, of course, being very symbolic of Revelation, symbolic of all of the churches that are in the province of Revelation at this time. So who is this man on the coin? This is the first governor, Manius Aquilius, and you can see his name in a bilingual inscription in Greek and Latin. And again, this sits at the base of the Ephesus site at the beginning of the Harbor Way, where a number of milestones are located. And you can see from the Roman numeral or the epsilon here, this is from miles 5, just to the southwest of Ephesus, that was brought into the site to conserve it. And this governor made an important road, or roads, one that ran up the coast all the way to the Hellespont, and another road came from Pergamum, met at Laodicea, the meeting the road from Ephesus that ran all the way down to where I live. So that's where I live right there, the biblical city of Attalia, modern Antalya near Pergae. And so it's along these routes then that the messenger carrying the book of Revelation took the book. And we have Patmos, today a Greek island in the antiquity, part of the Roman province of Asia, where John is in exile here as he's writing to these 7 churches. So some of the material culture, we know that we have Jewish communities. Tom talked about that yesterday with the synagogue in Sardis. And so one of the things I worked through in a recent volume, I did my own translation from the Greek text. And so you're going to see me introducing some variations from typical English text. So when we think of a lampstand, we're thinking something like a candle. But I think the word here is actually talking about menorahs, which is the most common symbol of Judaism that we see in archaeological sites all throughout Turkey today, especially in Western Turkey. So I translate this. I saw 7 golden menorahs. And so you can see the menorah that Steve Fine has been working on at the Arch of Titus in Rome there. In the center here, you see the menorah graffito that's on the steps of the Library of Celsus in Ephesus. And when I was in Vienna a few years ago, I had the privilege of going to the Ephesus Museum that's there and took this photograph of this lamp from Ephesus with a menorah as well. So this is some of the realia that we have showing Jews who lived in the city. Of course, we have texts that tell us about Jewish synagogues and communities, but in terms of realia, we still have never found, for example, a synagogue in Ephesus yet. So the letter to the Ephesians, one of the blame sayings that Jesus confronts the churches, he says, you've lost your first love. So if you look at commentaries, everyone is concerned with what is the first love that they've lost. Well, of course, most basically, it's the great commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So they've abandoned that. And so I began to consider what was the second love. Nobody seemed to be addressing that topic. And as I have gone through Ephesus on many, many trips, I don't know how many times, 100 times through the site, I kept noticing these inscriptions. It says Philosebastos. They're on the gateway to, go back, to the entrance to the commercial agora there, on the gate of Museos and Mithridates. They're on inscriptions throughout the city. And one very interesting one, right at the entrance to the latrines. And everybody has to see the latrines in Ephesus, and it's right there. Everybody walks past this one. All of these inscriptions mention something called Philosebastos. And we have this phenomenon developing during the time of Nero, running into the early 2nd century, nearly 200 inscriptions that are being found from this period at the very time Revelation is being written. And so I developed this in an article arguing that perhaps this is what we have that the early church is struggling with. We have elite people who are either have come to faith or are inquirers who are struggling with their social role here and the temptation to be loving emperor lovers, Sebastus, the Greek word for emperor, and joining their colleagues in erecting these type of inscriptions, and then others who are arguing that you cannot do this now as a follower of Jesus Christ. And so a friend and colleague, David da Silva, actually develops this theme a little bit in his recent novel about Ephesus and the early Christianity in this period. So it was a real tension that early Christians had. Do I love God or do I love the emperor? And those false prophets in the seven churches are arguing compromise, accommodation. And John, of course, is saying that's not possible. So an inscription that possibly, I'm not saying definitively this is, but perhaps informs the world of the churches of Revelation. So we see an athlete from a nice bronze in the museum in Izmir today, as well as a honorific funerary inscription that's in Ephesus today in the inscription gallery. And look at all of those wreaths on there. If you did a close-up, what you would be seeing is the names of the games where these wreaths were won at. So this is obviously an ancient superstar. And we have, typically in our English translations, it says, I'll give you the crown of life. But when you think about what a crown is, I think of something Queen Elizabeth wears, you know, one of these metal things. But the text here in Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, when he talks about a wreath that wilts, and we compete for a wreath that's imperishable, we're talking about something made of organic materials, oak or olive or whatever. And this wreath then becomes a symbol of victory. And so this is one of the promises that we have to the Christians in Smyrna. I will give you the wreath of life. So it's a direct connection back to the ancient games. All the cities here in Southwest Asia Minor had stadiums and all related to that. So Nike is also very much related. She's the goddess of victory in antiquity. So you can see her riding in this one coin. Notice she's holding two things. She has a palm branch and she has a wreath. The frieze to the right is from the Heracles Gate in Ephesus. This becomes a very popular place with groups in Ephesus and the Domitian Square. They want to take pictures next to the Nike relief here. And notice again, you see her. So these visuals were just a part of the audience of the original readers of the book of Revelation. So the palm branch, the wreath in the left hand, the palm branch in the right. And so we're entering into the visual world of the audience, and a world that's very strange to us. And so this is where archaeology and material culture can help us to understand the message of Revelation. So for example, in 7:9, when John looks visually and sees a large multitude holding palm branches in their right hands, we're not told who they are. But the very fact that they're holding palm branches tells us that these are victors. And again, going back to the symbolism that we see here. As we move on to Smyrna here, this is the agora that's under excavation. This is a challenge of urban archaeology in a modern city, the third largest city in Turkey today. In this excavation, the reason it's preserved, it became a later Muslim cemetery, and so nothing was built here in this area. And there's been an active excavation going on here now for about 2 decades. Now, in this north gallery, where it's covered with the metal roofing there, very important discoveries were made roughly around 15 years ago. We had the largest find of graffiti in the Greek East from there. So Latin graffiti, the biggest find is at Pompeii. Here we have Greek graffiti. They're numbering it in the thousands. Nobody knows the exact number, but we have at least 500 textual examples. And these are been inscribed on these walls, just like graffiti by locals and visitors to the city. The predominant images that we see here are ships that you can see in the background here, or gladiators or some sort of combat scenes. So these are very important for, again, understanding the background. particularly of this phenomenon called isopsephism. So what is isopsephism? How does this pertain to the book of Revelation? Well, one of the popular ones that we see here and in other places is an isopsephism of desire. So you could write, I love the woman whose number is 1308, okay? So you could put her name in, because in Greek and in Hebrew, letters were also used for numbers. These letters could calculate names. And so this calculates 1308 to the name TK. One of the interesting ones, probably one of the earliest Christian graffitos that we have, is this one from a Christian by the name of Artemidorus, who's from Smyrna. And you can see that in the Greek here, isosthema, kurios omega, pistis omega. So he was evidently a math student. So he was able to calculate the sum of the letters in the word kurios, which is Lord, equals omega. Some of the letters in faith, pistis, equal omega. And so he's inscribed this graffito on the wall here in Smyrna. Equal in value, Lord, 800, faith, 800. So this ties right in with Revelation 13:18. One who has understanding, calculate the number of the beast. His number is 666, not 666, 666. So this is an example again of isopsephism. So John is expecting his audience to be able to make a calculation then of an individual in their known world whose the sum of the letters in his name would equal this. Now, this graffiti that we're looking at in Smyrna dates a little bit later, to late 2nd to 3rd century, but it really shows an ongoing familiarity with this phenomenon of isopsephism. So this is the Hebrew and Greek didn't come through in the slide, but it's from my book of charts of Revelation. In Hebrew, the name Neron Kaiser adds up to 666. So most Revelation scholars think that Nero then is the object of the identification of 666. Just by way of exercise, the Greek sum of Iesus is 888. So who is this woman on the beast that we see in Revelation 17? So John sees this woman sitting on a scarlet beast, the image you're all familiar with. And of course, the image that we're looking at the right is in central Rome today. She still presides over the city of Rome at Campidoglio here. So here's a coin from the second half of the 1st century. We see the 7 heads are 7 hills upon which the woman sits. And we can see very clearly Roma here seated upon 7 hills. So this dates from the period of Vespasian. So coins validating or corroborating the imagery that we're seeing here in the book of Revelation. Now, the first temple to Dea Roma in the province of Asia was actually before Asia became part of the Roman Empire. And this was in Smyrna in 195 when they built the first temple. And we can see Dea Roma here holding her temple, whoops, I gotta get these buttons right, there in her hand. And we see this, even though it's a later period, it's showing this temple here. Then in the lower one, we see from a later period, the 3 temples, the imperial cult temples called the Neocorus, or the Neocorate was awarded to Smyrna 3 times by this period. And these 3 temples here, and then the central one, we see the role Omega here, symbolizing Roma, and she's sharing her temple now with Hadrian as part of this period. And so Dea Roma, familiar to those again in the 7 churches as a patron deity of Rome, and the one being referred to here in Revelation 17. We go on up the road now to Pergamum. Incidentally, I give my students and folks a way to remember the 7 churches. We all know ESP. Just think of extrasensory perception, ESP. So Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum. Then TSP, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and then L. So ESP, TSP, L, you got the 7 churches down, okay? So that's your final exam before you can leave today. So one of the big questions is the altar of Zeus in Pergamum the seat of Satan that's being referred to there? Many scholars have chosen that. So when I was in Berlin a few years ago for International Epigraphy Congress, we literally had the reception in the hall with the altar of Zeus. And I remember it was like Night in the Museum, you know, the movie. So here we are, this group of epigraphers, archaeologists that were in there. We had the run of the place, and literally for the speech there of welcome, we were sitting on the steps of the altar. So it was one of my memorable nights of travel here. So is this the seat of Satan? Now, when we talk about Neocris, we find this word one time, Acts chapter 19, when there's a reference by the town clerk of Ephesus to the fact that all the world knows that Ephesus is the Neocris of the temple of Artemis, okay? So it's used there in Acts chapter 19. And so this refers to the fact that the city was designated to maintain an imperial cult temple for the emperor. And so Asia had very much bought into this idea. And the first temple was built in Pergamum in 29 BC to Augustus and Diaroma. So the writers, both Suetonius and Tacitus, tell us about this. At this time, because Romans did not worship living emperors as divine beings, there was a sanctuary for Divus Julius and Diaroma erected in Ephesus for Roman residents. So that was the first sanctuary that we had for the emperor in that city. In 23, now the Koinon, this is the assembly of the Asian cities, decreed that a second temple would be built, and Smyrna, because of its longstanding relationship through its temple of Diaroma, was given the right over Sardis to build the temple in 26. So this is our second imperial cult temple. And then finally, the third one, because of the temple of Artemis, the Roman Senate was reluctant to give Ephesus the right to build a temple. Finally, they relented, and in 89 and 90, Domitian builds a third imperial cult temple that you can still see the remains just to the west of the upper state agora, raised on a high platform there in a valley, now in the so-called Domitian Square. And so the temple for the Sebastoi. So these are the 3 imperial cult temples that we have from the 1st century in the province of Asia. And so as we look at the Neocrit coins of Pergamum, this is the only evidence for that temple, the first temple that was built in 29 that we have. It was built in the lower city. The modern small city of Bergama has overbuilt this. So archaeologically, we have no idea where this temple was located. Probably somewhere in the proximity of the Red Hall I showed you yesterday, but we don't know. Until they start tearing down modern houses and doing some ground survey that possibly can find it, but we don't know. So the only evidence we have on these coins showing the Neocarit that Pergamum had. And so my view, because Antipas is the only person who is mentioned by name who was killed here in Pergamum, it's the imperial cult temple and its influence in the province of Asia that really is the opposition, the seat of Satan, and the fact that Pergamum was the beginning of imperial cult worship in the province of Asia. So this is my view on how to identify that strong image. So just outside the 4th temple, the Temple of Trajan, that's built in the early 2nd century, we have this very interesting inscription. And we see 2 of our 7 churches mentioned here. So down below, we can see the Demos, that is the assembly of the city of Thyatira, is erecting this stone to honor its neighbor Pergamum for its first proton kai dis Neocron of the emperor. And so their neighbor now has been given the first right in the province of Asia to have 2 imperial cult temples. And so we have this inscription mentioning this with this key word. So the statue of the beast. We know usually in translations it says the image of the beast, but we need the thing statue, okay? When ikono, the Greek word there, and I translate it throughout as statue. And this statue then that would be erected, it would be symbolizing, and I'll just show you in a second, who that beast would be that's represented in by these statues erected throughout the province of Asia. And these statues usually would be painted, they'd be made of marble or bronze, and they would portray the emperor in three ways. So they would show him as the military conqueror in a cuirass. We use that word to describe how he's depicted. And literally you go in every museum in Turkey, Greece, this part of the world, even in Israel, you see statues, either mostly, occasionally you'll see them in bronze, but mostly in marble, depicting emperors in this form, naked like a god. So showing his divinity. So strength as military leader of the legions, here naked like a god, and then togated. He's the model Roman citizen. So this is a very nice statue of Hadrian we see in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, one of the very rare bronze statues that have remained. Normally they melted these down, but this is still on display in Istanbul. So the three forms that the early Christians in these seven churches would have seen, city after city, depictions of the emperor in statue form that were there. A few years ago, I was at a conference on Caligula in Richmond, and they'd done some restorations of what these statues of Caligula in their collection would have been looked like as possible reconstructions with painting. So just imagine all of these statues that we're looking at that are so white today would have been painted often in very bright colors, but of course the imperial purple, the purple and scarlet that's on the woman seated on the seven hills in 17 depict the imperial right to wear the purple. And here Caligula is depicted in this way with his togas. So blasphemous names. So the beasts are speaking blasphemous names unto God. This is another inscription just next to the one dealing with Thyatira and Pergamum. And this mentions, it's dated from the early 2nd century of Trajan as emperor. And it makes the bold claim here, he's the Lord of the land and the sea. And the word being used here is kurios, the most common name both in the Greek Old Testament and the New Testament for Lord Jesus Christ, Lord. And so again, part of the tension that Christians were experiencing. Officially and unofficially, the emperors were called the Lord. So which Lord are you going to serve? The tension then that they're having with names like Kurios. We saw this Egyptian temple yesterday, and we have a reference in 1315 to give breath to the statue of the beast so that the beast statue might speak. Now, they're talking about a known phenomenon in the ancient world. And so you can see in the upper right here, a podium base that I showed yesterday. It was at the upper end of the temple. And literally there would be a bronze statue of the Egyptian god standing there. And notice the hole in the middle here. Literally the priest then could come up into the statue and move the statue, cause it to speak, give life to the statue here that was there, and give the appearance of some sort of life, perhaps speaking, smoke and mirrors, light show, or something that they are able to do this to give life to the beast. And of course, this is immortalized, you can see in the lower right in Caesar's palace, when they have this talking Caesars exhibition there with the statues there that they picked up on this for their at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas today. This phenomenon that again is mentioned in the book of Revelation that we can see archaeologically here in Pergamum. In Thyatira today, sitting outside the new museum, so groups in the past have been tempted to skip Akhisar because there wasn't much to see, but there is today. So very much encourage you. They've restored the colonnaded street there. They have a nice small local museum. And then the courtyard, they have quite an important inscription that's mentioned whenever you read about Jews in Asia Minor. And this is on this sarcophagus. And it mentions a Sambatheon in the Chaldean precinct. And so scholars of Judaism at this period are still debating, is this referring to a Jewish place or someplace else here on the outskirts of ancient Thyatira? But this is the inscription that's mentioned, and we still have that sarcophagus to look at and to make you there to evaluate it and to think about the Jewish communities that were living in these cities here in the first couple centuries. Of course, we know of a very famous woman came from Thyatira. Paul meets her in Philippi, and she is representing her trade guild in Thyatira by being in a Roman colony where there's high demand for purple and scarlet, and she's selling purple in the city of Philippi. And we have evidence of trade guilds in these two inscriptions that sit now in the open air museum. To the left, you can see the mention of the fullers, the Nafes, who erected this honorary inscription. And then to the right, to the lanarioi, the wool workers here in this city. And so we can see the continuity of this background of Thyatira being very important for its trade guilds. And of course, this becomes an important tension in the letter where a false prophetess named Jezebel, who is again advocating accommodation by eating food sacrificed to idols. And these trade guilds would hold their banquets at pagan temples. And Paul has written this to the Corinthians. No, you can eat food if your conscience permits, that's been bought in the marketplace, but in no way can you be eating in the pagan temples at the dining rooms that would be attached to these where pagan practices would take place. And so this seems to be the issue. And this is where these trade guilds. So by not attending these guild meetings, you can lose your union membership and potentially jeopardize your economic status as a believer. So these are some of the real tensions that are underscored by inscriptions like this. This is a very nice relief I stumbled upon in the museum in the Fair Museum in Izmir. It's literally showing the sacrifice of a lamb. And of course, we see in the vision in chapter 5-6, John beholding a lion, but it's the lamb who's being slaughtered, but who's now alive. And so lamb is the most common name for Jesus in the book of Revelation. Sardis, we saw this yesterday, this view of the Artemis Temple and the Acropolis. And the promise here is that I will never erase their names from the scroll of life. Now, some of the most familiar erasures in the ancient world are this phenomenon of damnatio memoriae. So look at that. How would you like to have your name chiseled out a piece of marble? Well, we have three prominent emperors, Domitian being the first one at the end of the first century, and then Geta and Elagabalus in the early second or late second, early third century. So you can see two examples of this phenomenon of their names being erased from public monuments. And you see these in sites all over Turkey today. So then damnation of memory, perhaps illustrating what's being talked about here in that letter. In the Naples Museum today, they have this, I finally was able to track this down when I was in Italy, the base of a marvelous monument when the cities in Lydia and Ionia were devastated by an earthquake in AD 17. This is the way the cities thanked Rome for their financial support. They erected a monument with the statue of Tiberius, and around it were the personifications of each of the cities. And so this whole phenomenon of using a depiction of the city in female form, we saw that, of course, in 17 we talked about, but this whole idea of the angel of the church in Philadelphia writes. So this personification that's taking place in a form here on this base. Jews first come in large numbers to Asia Minor about 210, when we're told in Josephus that the Seleucids brought 2,000 families, both to Lydia and Phrygia out of Mesopotamia and Babylon. So this is the core of our community. And the mention of synagogues, as Tom talked about yesterday, both in Smyrna and in Philadelphia. No evidence of synagogue buildings today, although this particular table base to the right was found in Philadelphia, now in the museum at Manisa, which is the provincial museum for both Sardis and Philadelphia. And you can see quite clearly the typical menorah at the top. And so evidence then of a later Jewish community. So most of the archaeological pieces related to Judaism we have in Turkey start in 4th to 6th centuries. So, but we know from from texts that we have a much earlier community. So one of the great promises in this letter, I'll make victors a column. I don't like the translation pillar. These are columns. I'll make them a collar in the temple of my God. And this is the largest standing temple we have in Turkey today at Eisenoi. Look at these massive monolithic fluted columns that still stand there today. And just think of the spiritual image that God is saying is, if you are faithful, he's going to establish you, as a victor in his heavenly temple. So a great visual to illustrate that promise. He also says, I'm going to write upon them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. And we have this phenomenon in the province of Asia of columns being inscribed. And so this is in the upper city in Ephesus at the Prytanean. We have the names of the Curites inscribed on this column for roughly about 5 or 6 decades there. And you can see these names up there as well. This is another fun example at the Sardis Artemis Temple. This column base is actually speaking to those who come up and approach it. And it says to the observer, I am the first column to be erected. So it's wonderful. Again, another illustration of this promise that's given to those in Philadelphia. Well, we saw this picture yesterday. One of the most familiar warnings in Revelation, of course, is to Laodiceans. I'm sure many of you have heard a number of sermons based on this text. Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spew you. The word is literally vomit you out of my mouth. It's a very strong word. We get our word emetic from it, emeo, in 3:16. So you can see the steam coming off of the hot springs here at Pamukkale. Hierapolis is just behind us. Look at those beautiful snow-capped peaks to the south, framing the city of Laodicea. That's right in the middle. So you literally have hot and cold right there in the picture. So a number of interpretations of what this image, this warning is all about. I'm not totally convinced it has to do with water system yet, but it seems the most logical. But most of the writing on the water system is wrong on commentaries because we have a very good water source to the south of Laodicea. You can still see part of the siphon aqueduct that's here with the channel coming up to another siphon to the other side. And it's going to some very deep underwater springs that provide water for the modern city of Denizli today. So it was a very abundant water source that's only about 2 miles to the south. And you can see the South Water Tower here. And you can see from the buildup of the calcium carbonate that this water has a lot in it. You're hoping your arteries don't look like that, you know. And this pumped water to the middle water tower and distributed throughout the city. And so they had a very efficient water system. They've just discovered a very important water inscription in the city project I hope to write about here in the near future, dealing with this very important warning. One of the, and this just as a sidelight, one of the more interesting things they found here in Laodicea, as we talk about fusion of identities, and I take my groups to look at this and I say, how would you interpret this piece of archaeological reality? So this was part of a column fragment that was taken out of a nymphium that they were excavating there. I personally think this comes from a column of a synagogue. We have something similar in Priene where I excavated in 2010 and 11 with marking the entrance to this. So this is not a graffito. This is an intentional carving inscription into the column. So we can see the very typical menorah at the bottom with flames coming above it. Again, this is very standard iconography. Everybody know what this is, the shofar to the right. You've got a lulav, the palm branch here. And when they reconnected these two pieces, for many years they didn't have it together. We just have the base of the etrog or the citron there as well. So those three elements. But of course, look at the cross that's been inscribed over that with the globus right in the middle. So some people have interpreted this, that this is maybe a Jewish Christian who put this together. Others would say it shows the compatibility of Judaism and Christianity in Laodicea. As you look at closely, though, you can see the depth of the inscribing. The inscriber is different. It's not the same person who did this. And Steve Fine, who I took Steve to look at this, he says this is, from his perspective as a Jewish scholar, this is a hostile symbol where we see an early evidence of what we called supersessionism, of the triumph of Christianity over Judaism. And this is my interpretation of the symbol. I don't think this is a friendly one at all, but quite an interesting piece that's recently been discovered there that illustrate Christian and Jewish relations in Laodicea. Almost done. So a final slide. This is a really interesting tomb in Hierapolis near the North Frontinus Gate, and tells us erected by a merchant by the name of Flavius Zeuxis. And you'll see this inscription mentioned in everything on New Testament backgrounds. And it tells us that Zeuxis, he traveled 72 times around Cape Malea. Well, where is this cape? It's the tip of the Peloponnesus of Greece, a very difficult passage. And so he would have had to travel 100 miles from the valley to Ephesus, boarded ships, and then travel to Rome. So 72 passages, again, illustrating the merchants, the trade that was going on that is mentioned in Revelation 18. So a couple final observations. Revelation is a visual and an oral document. Throughout, John says, I saw or I heard. And the understanding of this book is enhanced through a knowledge of material culture. The language and illustrations were familiar to the first audiences, but they're very difficult for us to understand unless we begin to have a knowledge of Greco-Roman history, geography, and material culture that suddenly the apocalypse becomes more unlocked for us. And as we've seen, archaeology is continuing to reveal new data, informing and illustrating the world of early Christians, particularly in the seven churches. So, few things just related to our ministry in Turkey. If you're interested in downloading and looking at any of my articles, you can go on academia or to my website. I invite you to do that or email me. And I thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity to share about the seven churches.
No, they're better. Are we okay? Oh, I think we were too close. Okay, I was too close. Someone was too close. So before Kendra, you give your response, if anybody has a question, maybe one or two, and then Dawn, I don't know if we have anybody from, we do have somebody. Those of you watching this on Zoom can interact. You can use the chat box or Q&A and send something, and Dawn will read it for us. Are you ready, Dawn? Okay.
Do I have, there it is. Okay, thank you. All right, we've got a question here that is referring to, you spoke about the priests coming up into the statues and moving them and speaking through them. Was it a ceremonial formality, or did the people actually believe that those were the deities, or that they were actually interacting with them?
Well, living in an age now where disinformation is believed, facts are not believed. I think it's entirely credible that some people in the ancient world thought this was real supernatural activity that was going on. We have some textual sources that mention this phenomenon, and the temple there shows us that this take place. So. It was a way for these priests, obviously, to exert power over the worshipers that were there. But there seems to be a belief of credibility that something supernatural, mystical was taking place there, and not simply a deception. Although John is saying that this is deception that's occurring.
Okay, and we have one question here, and then we will turn to our respondent.
Any idea why those specific 7 churches were picked and others were excluded?
I think it has to do with the route, and it was a very efficient route up the coast and then cutting inland. I think what we saw with the mention yesterday of circularity of these documents, where Paul is writing to the Colossians and said, but share this with the church in Hierapolis and Laodicea as well. So I think you can just imagine that the Revelation, the Apocalypse, is going to be shared with his same churches. So I think these 7 would have made copies and sharing them with proximate churches as well. So I think the audience is much greater than just the 7.
Thank you, Mark, for connecting us with the reality of Asia Minor at the time of the New Testament. Kendra.